The children in the lift must mind those doors, mind those doors, mind those doors. Little fingers on the lift must mind those doors all day long.
Yes, Mark, I have been in the industry for... onto it later, but I'm also a qualified counsellor as well. So what that's actually shown me is that I go into meetings now and I meet people and I'm looking at them from a different aspect, from the point of view of not looking at what I'm seeing, but looking beyond what I'm seeing.
Welcome to the channel, Karl. We have Karl Grey with us today from Ascent Lift Consultancy. Is that right? Have I got that correct? Yep. He's joined us on the channel to talk a little bit about his history in the lift industry, where he started and where he is now. One of the things I always say and I try to do is steer away from we can mention sort of, you know, people, company names and stuff, but not in a negative way, because we've all had experiences in our time, and sometimes there's a temptation to drift into that, but we'll steer away from that, hopefully. And we'll take from there. But as these all have been, it will be a conversational piece, and I'm sure it will develop in different directions as we go along. So Karl, can you tell us where did you start in the industry?
Well, I'm a classically trained 4-year apprentice.
Okay.
Apprenticeship in Australia with a company called Elevators Proprietary Limited, who were taken over by Coney, and then worked after that. After about 5 years of working for them, I went to work for Otis for about 4 years.
Still in Australia, yeah?
Still in Australia, yeah. And then I did the sort of normal Aussie thing, or the regular Aussie thing, which was I came over to Europe and did some travelling for about 5 months, and then I got a job in London with Evans Lifts as a troubleshooter. I worked there for 3 years in London, and then got promoted up to Birmingham and worked as a branch manager for Evans, and then I met my wife to be, and moved up to Manchester and worked for Keithley Lifts, who subsequently bought by.
I'm sure there's many people watching who think, oh, promoted to Birmingham, eh? So going to Birmingham as a promotion, that's
well, yeah.
Nothing against Birmingham. I'm just.
I was going to make a comment, but you beat the point. Yeah, no, I've worked in the Manchester area now since around about 1991. I worked for Pickering's Lifts. As I say, I worked for Schindler. I moved to Pickering's Lifts, and then I got headhunted to go back to Schindler again. And while I was at Schindler, my ex-boss went to work for a lift consultancy at FC Foreman's, who are now Foreman partners. Yeah. And he invited me to come and work as a lift consultant, which I'd always wanted to do in the industry. So in 1996, I joined him, and I worked for Foreman's Roberts for a while, and then set up my own company, own lift consultancy company. Yeah. And then I had to close that down because I went through divorce, one thing and another, long tail. But and I went back to work for Cundall's, a big M&E consultancy in Manchester. And then after being made redundant, I set up my own company, Ascent Lift Consultancy, and doing that ever since. We're working into the 9th year now of being as Ascent Lift Consultancy. So that sort of brings you up to where I am at the present day.
And you haven't looked back. And what's your day-to-day life made up of now as a lift consultant?
Well, it's a mixture of things. There's sort of 4 main sort of streams, which is there's new lift installations, modernisations, there's service, contracts, bulk contracts, and then the other one is what I call service support, service portfolio management, where basically clients will give me their portfolio, and I'll just manage it from the point of view of insurance reports, quotations, repairs. To some extent, I deal with call-outs, but not directly. That's normally done by the customer. But if there's any issues, or complications, then I get involved with that.
Yeah.
So then sort of them 4 streams of information, and then to some extent some teaching as well.
Okay, so you did a bit of training. So that's quite interesting. Actually, you've been in the industry a fair time, so you've probably seen some changes in your time.
Yeah, I mean, I started in 1974.
Yeah.
When the equipment I was working on was just starting to change over to electronics. So a lot of the stuff that I worked on was electromechanical relay-based controllers.
Yeah.
And then when I left EPL were probably, they were actually quite a forerunner in regards to electronics, because they were one of the first that started to use integrated circuitry. And then when I went to Otis, it was interesting because it was almost like going back 3 decades, because I went back to a company where most of the equipment was electromechanical. But Otis being part of UTC, they had a bunch of scientists, can you believe, hanging about in NASA. They had nothing to do. So they charged them with developing an electronic system for their controllers.
Yeah.
So
is that where the Elevonics come from? The 401s and the 411s and stuff? The
101s, yeah. So I got involved sort of at the beginning stage of the transition over to from electromechanical into electronic, which was interesting, because instead of you actually being able to see, relays clattering about, suddenly you're just watching blinking lights.
Yeah, I don't know. I still like a relay. I'm not a great lover of MRLs, to be fair to you. They are the way it is. It's life. It's the way the industry's gone. But I do like a motor room. I do like to see a bit of machinery moving. I do like to know what it's doing.
Yeah, well, the thing with MRLs, and I'm of the same sort of mindset, is that once you open that controller cabinet, if it's associated with the architrave, you're exposing yourself to the public. Where I would have a room where you can lock the door, and then you're not exposing anybody to any hazards. So but in the main, I mean, MRLs, they're a lot more efficient than traditional traction lifts. And I suppose at the end of the day, it helps architects and designers, because everything's inside the shaft. They haven't got to start work on putting in a motor in, etc., etc. So horses for courses, I suppose. So
you've seen like a electronic progress and the way the control panels have gone. What about from a because obviously you're involved in the consultancy side as well. What about from a logistical and expectations from, obviously you can't mention customers. Do you think the expectations from customers have increased since when you first started?
Yeah, I think like any sort of industry in life now, everything's a lot faster. The advent of electronic communication, obviously, at one time, if a customer wanted to converse with you, they'd write a letter. So that would take, maybe several days to get delivered, and then you'd have several days to be able to reply to the letter, and then they'd receive it. Nowadays, of course, you get people sending you an email, and they want immediate response. So communication is a lot quicker, but it's also a lot easier, because you can communicate a lot faster these days than used to be able to. And it's also speeded up things like delivering of spare parts, because everything now is electronically managed. And we have a lot better tracking systems now, so that we can actually identify parts a lot easier than we used to in the past. So
that's interesting. So I had a conversation with someone a short while ago about the expectations of customers, and I feel that sometimes us as an industry, we maybe give a customer a bit of a false expectation that, because some parts can take weeks, even depending on where you're coming from, we're getting months to come, and we're not an industry like Amazon, where we can just click our fingers and things turn up. And I just wonder, my core business, Ascent Lift Solutions, is a consultancy, and you're a consultancy, but I just wonder whether consultancies, in a way, when tenders are procured or produced and things like that, whether we're culpable in it by putting in their expectations. That I know lift companies agree to them expectations. There's the flip side of it. Don't agree to it if you can't do it. But do you ever find sometimes you're reading something yourself and you think, oh, that's going to be really hard to do, or
Well, it's a number of things. I think that the first, as a consultant, the first thing that I feel that we should do is we should set realistic expectations.
Yeah.
So, I have clients saying to me, well, yeah, I want to modernise the lift, but I want to get on with it. Can't we have the tender returned within a week, or can't we, the time scale for the, modernising this lift to 10 weeks? Can we not drop it down to 7, for instance? So there's a lot of negotiation at the early stage, and one thing I'm very, very sensitive to is setting realistic expectations, because I've been in meetings with contractors and I've been in meetings with clients where that what's being talked about is not realistic, and it would be lovely to think that yes, okay, we can do this within a time scale, but I've been in the industry for a long time now, and I know the way it works, and I know the complications and problems that can arise. So it's just a case of really getting people to sit back down and come up with realistic expectations, so that the client isn't let down because suddenly the program is overrun.
But I think
the contracts. Sorry, I was just going to say.
Yeah.
It's also on the contracting side, the client is putting unnecessary stress onto the contractor, who then, through no fault of his own, he might be making mistakes because he's trying to cut corners to get things done quicker, and he might be trying to procure stuff, and especially as you'll be aware of, and most people these days, the world that we live in now, timescales and deliveries and material availability is not what it used to be. So and again, that has to be a negotiation between the client and the contractor. And when I say client, it could be a builder, it could be a retailer, it could be a developer. And then that way, you can deliver a project that everybody knows, you said it was going to take 10 weeks and it's taken 10 weeks. The contractor knows that he's got 10 weeks to do it in, and he gets it finished in 10 weeks. So everybody are working as a team, rather than having this push and pull from different parties trying to bring things down, which at the end of the day, the program generally will overrun because the expectation is set too high.
Yeah, no, I think you're totally right there, and I think we need to set them expectations. And I think lift companies as well, in the when completing the tender documents. I was about to say, really, you've got to have a level of honesty where you are with a business. The problem is, you sort of end up discounting yourself sometimes from business. Like I said, you end up agreeing to stuff where you think, oh, I'm a bit close to the mark there, but if I don't agree to it, I'm out the tender process. So it's good that if you're on the other side of the table like yourself, you can evaluate these, and you can ask the right questions then, can't you? When they do a presentation or however the tenders run, depending on the size. At least you can ask the right questions about their delivery, and you'd like to think that, you get a nice, honest response back.
Well, the thing is, I've been on the contracting side, and I've bid for jobs, modernisation jobs as a salesman, and I'm obviously on the other side now with regard to consultancy. So I've seen the process from both sides, and I know I used to get frustrated when I was a contractor because, again, you're bidding with other people. You want to put a good bid in. You want to make sure that everything's been covered and you haven't obviously left anything out or whatever. And also, it's sometimes the tenders can be conflicting, and it's a case of being able to. One thing I'm very aware of with myself is that I have flexibility within the tender specification for people to deviate, for instance, from the specification.
Yeah.
I look for full compliance, but then they've got the option that if they can do something quicker or cheaper, I don't discount that, and that can be put into a deviation section, and that again allows a dialogue. So I get phone calls from contractors saying, "Look, we want to do this. Is that okay?" Where rather than them sitting at their desk thinking, "No, well, we can't deviate on this this specification. We've got to go for full compliance," and it allows that dialogue to be able to. And then again, if there's any conflicting stuff, it's only a phone call back to the client to just clarify. Look, we've got this. Are you happy for an alternative to go forward? Again, for me as a consultant, it's all about dialogue. You know, that's the most important. Is it's just a constant communication between myself and the client, and myself and the contractor, to make sure that all of us are working to the same aim. And that goes for, you know, if you've got builders involved, other trades involved, electrical trades, if you've got you know, people from the CDM being involved in it, facilities management, and anybody that's sort of got a vested interest. It's a case again of I've got involved so many times in projects where dialogue hasn't taken place, which should have, and that creates stress and strain within the process, which isn't needed.
The reason I sort of led on to expectations is because my view is some of these expectations that we set and we agree to sort of brings pressure on ourselves and then makes the industry more pressurized and more difficult to work in. Yeah. So like I said, that's why I think sometimes we're culpable in it. So from sort of diversifying a little bit, because obviously we've touched on your history and a little bit on your history and what you're doing now in the consultancy. But on that subject, sort of pressures in the industry and things like that, what do you feel has changed from maybe there isn't a change, from a mental health aspect in the 80s and 90s, which was probably non-existent, to the mental health now? You know, would you say we've progressed much, or we've progressed a little bit, or what's your thoughts on the mental health side?
We'll probably come on to it later, but I'm also a qualified counsellor as well. So what that's actually shown me is that I go into meetings now and I meet people and I'm looking at them from a different aspect, from the point of view of not looking at what I'm seeing, but looking beyond what I'm seeing. And what I mean by that is you're sitting in meetings with somebody who maybe was quite demonstrative and quite jolly, and then suddenly comes into a meeting and he's quite quiet. It's then looking at the individuals, and as the years have gone on, of course, when I'm sitting in meetings, you can see the stresses that are being put on people now, both from the client side, because if you're working with a project manager, for instance, you can see that he's being pushed by his bosses. And you can see that the project manager from the lift company is being pushed by his. And again, it comes back to really, you know, it's all sitting down and saying, look, what is realistic here? We need to do, and being on it. The biggest issue from a consultant's point of view is people not giving you bad news. Yeah. You know, people want to come to meetings and give you good news. I'd rather hear the bad news so that we can sit down and talk about it, work through it, rather than suddenly finding that I make a phone call one day to be told, you know, we were going to get delivery of this equipment, and then you find that it's actually not going to be for several weeks. And it's like, well, we don't need to have them conversations, because and I know bad news for some people is, you know, it's hard, but you need to sort of just bite the bullet and say, you know what, there's no point in trying to hide this, because it's going to come out.
You touched on earlier, obviously, about the counselling side of it, which is, like I said, is what you've taken things from I wouldn't say a different aspect, but you get an all-round aspect of what's going on in the industry from that. How did you get involved in counselling? How did that happen?
Well, it actually happened as a result of I think I said earlier about when I had to cease trading my first company. I went through divorce. And I went through a really tough time, and a friend of mine I was looking for something to do, really, sort of occupy my mind, and a friend of mine mentioned counselling, and I thought something I'd never thought of or considered, and I went for a 10-week course, and I was hooked, and I just thought this is really, to be able to. It was really about the interaction of people and from that course and the way we view things. And then I went on from there to do that was a level 1 course. I went on to do a level 2, 3 course, which was a year. That went into it in even further depth. And by then I was hooked, and I thought, well, I can't stop now. I'm going to have to go on and do the diploma. So I did a 2-year diploma in Stockport and qualified in 2014 as a therapeutic counsellor. So, but it was as a result, really, of my own mental state when I went through divorce, And I found that the counselling and the talking therapies was a way of being able to help me through that really, really tough time.
Wow. So that's so you've done that in 2014, and have you got your own? Is your counselling service part of your current business, or is it a separate business entirely?
So it's a separate business. There has been some crossover, somewhat limited crossover. The interesting thing, I run my own private practice now in conjunction with the Lift Consultancy. Basically, I devote Fridays to counselling, and Monday to Thursdays are devoted to the Lift Consultancy business, and I do counselling sessions in the evening, Monday to Friday. I don't work weekends. But what's been interesting is that the counselling informs the consultancy, and the consultancy informs the counselling. So people might be thinking, hang on a second, that's two completely diverse fields. It isn't actually. As I say, I find that I'm sitting in meetings looking at individuals where maybe in the past I might have get frustrated with them. Now I look beyond that, and it's like, okay, something's going on here with this guy. And I've pulled people aside after a meeting to just go and have a coffee with them, have a chat, and, you know, is everything okay? No, it's not, you know, blah, 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 blah. And that leads on to other things.
That's really interesting, because so on my website, as part of my business, Ascent Lift Solution, I've got sort of mental health services that are done through our Mental Health Matters. Now, over time, with the Lift Industry Mental Health Charter, over time that will probably come away from my website, and it will be more obviously the Lift Industry Mental Health Charter. But I probably will have an element of that on there just to divert them to the actual charter itself. So what's interesting there, we've got a similar train of thought in that they are interlinked in a way. So if someone was to come to counselling, so I've never done one-to-one counselling myself. I've spoken to talking therapies in around issues what I had with sleep and other things as well. But I've spoken to talking therapies, but that's very much sort of phone-based therapy. So are you doing Teams-based calls? Are you doing one-to-one at a practice, at a premises, or how does it work with yourself?
Well, I prefer to work face to face initially, if that's possible. Geographically, sometimes it's not. Clients that are based in London, for instance, and I've got clients that are based in Lancashire. So for them to come over to where I am in Cheshire is difficult. So I will hold either a team or Skype or Zoom call. Do the therapy through that. It's just as effective. It's better face to face, because having someone and the presence of someone in a room has more power to it. I don't personally do telephone counselling, but there are therapists that do telephone counselling. So it's really, for me at the moment, it's a combination of having the Zoom / Team / Skype calls where you can help somebody, and then the face-to-face. And it's just a case of really just going through with the client and just talking therapies. Really, I suppose it's such a short description, but basically what we are doing is we're talking, but while we're talking, we're exploring. So it's a case of people might come to counselling with particular issues, and as we talk through the issues, it might be that there are other issues that are actually affecting the issue that they think is the main problem. There may be, as a result of the exploration of something, there may be something else that comes up for the client that they've not even considered. Oh yeah, well that's the point. Yeah, well maybe that's why I do that, or why I've done that for years. And it's an amazing process, because to see someone come in with their head down and, you know, a grey demeanour, and they can't see the way through, to then maybe in 3 months or 6 months' time, again with counselling, there's no set time scale. To see them walk out of the room with their head up and they've got their confidence back and their self-esteem is an amazing thing to see. The transformation in people, and they get their power back. They get themselves back. You know, when they're into the room initially, it's like they've actually lost part of themselves.
No, and what's strange for me, sitting on the other side of the screen, it's not strange. It's brilliant to see, in that you talk about the consultancy side, and you're very knowledgeable there. But for me, the passion comes out in the counselling side.
Right.
And you can see that. You can see that. And it's a bit like myself in that, you know, I love lifts. That sounds a bit sad to say, but I do. I love lifts. I won't say I love the industry, but I like the industry. But I am, you know, really interested in the mental health aspect of it and the impacts of it. And that you know, we've got similar interest in that respect and how it actually comes around. But you can see it. You can see it in yourself, the passion towards it.
Well, I did consider, and I will go on evaluating it, but I did consider actually moving over full time to counselling. The reality is that it is financially that would be difficult.
Yeah.
And also, the reality is with counselling is you can only take on so much. If you have too many clients, you'll get into burnout.
Yeah.
And the other thing, like yourself, I actually love the industry, all the frustrations and, you know, the turmoil that goes on. Yes, it can be difficult at times, but the thing that I recognised is that when I was looking and reviewing, should I basically move over to counselling full time, I realised that would be part of my life that I'd cut out, that I really like doing. So, and again, I'm very, very thankful that I have two loves in my life, which is the lift industry and counselling, and I you know, I'm doing two jobs that I love doing, and being able to split them. So that, and the other thing with counselling is I don't want to get into the stage where it becomes my only means of income, because then that puts unnecessary strain on me and stress.
Yeah.
I want to be there for the clients. I don't want to be concerning myself with financial worries. So by having the lift consultancy and doing something that I enjoy doing, it allows me then to be flexible with regard to the counselling. So as I say, I feel very blessed that I'm able to do two things in my life.
Yeah, you can see that really comes across. So a couple of things from our conversation. So obviously you can't disclose any, you know, information about anyone that you've had counselling, you've provided counselling for. But what I'm not sure if you can really answer this, but I'm going to ask her anyway. What is the most probably common issue that you come across?
Definitely anxiety and stress.
Yeah,
without doubt. Yeah. I think with COVID, I think, and Brexit, especially now with the financial crisis that we've been going through, and obviously the war in Ukraine, they're putting incredible stresses on people that weren't there before. And as a consequence, especially with COVID, we're seeing now in the counselling industry, we're starting to see clients come to us now with COVID-related issues. Now that might be actually that they've been affected mentally and physically with COVID, or it might be that as a consequence of COVID, an example would be that somebody had to self-isolate or shield for a while, and that's impacted on their mental health. That's taken a while to work through once we went back into so-called normal, normal society. And they're finding now that there's stuff that's coming up that they're really struggling with. So they'll, as I say, I've got several clients now that are actually working with me as a result of what happened during COVID.
Wow.
So, and that really relates. A lot of it relates around social anxiety, where people were isolated for a length of time. They got used to being in the house, for instance, on their own, and not they couldn't go out. And now trying to reintegrate themselves back into society for individuals is a real problem.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely, I would think the top one would be definitely stress and anxiety.
Stress and anxiety, and one of the questions I've asked before, again, is probably, I don't know if there's scientific answers to this or whether it's subjective, but did you think mental health issues are inherently there as part of the person's makeup and it's just something triggers it for it to come out? Or do you think you can have someone going along quite happily and they gradually develop it? How do you think they start
I think it's a combination. What it really boils down to is it boils down to your own resilience. You know, you can take two people and you can give each of them 5 tasks, and one person will manage quite happily with that. And when I say 5 tasks, it might not be just work related. It could be personal, for instance. They've got a mum that needs support or whatever. And then you can take another person and give them the same 5 similar challenges, and they'll fall over. And the difference between the two of them is their resilience. And there's no blame saying one is better than the other. It's just what, as a human being, we have within ourselves to be able to tap into. Some people can work through amazing bits of work-related stresses, and it doesn't really affect them. Other people, as I say, you give them 1, 2 or 3 extra tasks to do, and they feel overwhelmed. So it's something a lot of it boils back to child development, what we went through as a child and how we were supported and how we grew and we developed. And some others, like anything in life, sometimes we're presented, as I was, you know, I went through divorce, I didn't plan it. But then you suddenly, you know, your whole world is turned upside down, and you're suddenly faced with a whole load of issues that you've got to deal with that you didn't think you would ever need to, you know. And the same with people that go through life and suddenly, you know, they lose a partner, or they get made redundant, or, you know, a grandmother that they're really close to suddenly dies, and it impacts on them. So, and that's where part of what I do as a counsellor is to tap into that resilience that every one of us has. But sometimes we don't feel that we've got it because of external forces, and you know, we go into it. It's rather like giving somebody 5 jobs at work, and then suddenly they go into overload. You know, they know they can do it, but the thing is that maybe those 5 jobs have got unrealistic timescales. Well, then they'll fall over, or they'll just feel that, you know, this is too much, I can't.
What's interesting there, you said about resilience, and others have mentioned that as well. And the more and more I ask the question, the more it probably does boil down to resilience. So using me as an example, I was still am pretty resilient person, or consider myself to be, but I felt that because I was suffering with a lack of sleep, and that goes for various different reasons. You know, I'd wake up and my mind would be going 10 to a dozen for whatever reason. Because I suffered from a lack of sleep, I feel that the following day that sort of lowered my resilience. And so because that lack of sleep lowered my resilience, I then become more susceptible to stuff during the day that maybe I wouldn't have been normally. And then it sort of snowballed from there. And then you then start to suffer with stress issues, and maybe even depression or whatever. So I suppose in a way, the resilience is a really, I would actually, using myself as an example, I would agree with that one.
And the thing about resilience is that we can get up one day and feel like the world's too much, and too much, and then the next day we can wake up and, you know, that job that we need to do, or that form we need to fill out, or that appointment we need to go and make, we'll find that it's not an issue. Something within us that we're able to tap into to be able to manage to go and do that. And it's really, life is, I suppose, to some extent, it's about having consistency. You know, we're not robots. You know, life is not a flat curve. We've got the ups and downs. The difference is that when we dip, it's, have we got the resources? That's where the resilience comes in. Have we got the resources then to pull us back out of that dip? Yeah, and get us back on to a somewhat normal, what I call like a baseline of to manage with things. And some of us are better at that than others. You know, some people can bounce back really quick. Other people, they take a lot longer. It's the same. Most people would associate with bereavement. You know, some people can get through bereavement. There's no time scales with bereavement, but they seem to be able to adapt and cope and accept a lot quicker than other people. And again, it's not a case of saying, well, them people that take longer are wrong. It's just that them people are coming from a different place, and that's where, you know, we need to support and help these people through that period, and not try and compare with others to say, well, you know, she got through mum's loss in a few months, and now it's 2 years down the line, you're still not over it. That is not proving anything other than really putting the person even further down than they already feel. So that's where, again, it's about building on that resilience. It's like what you've still got it. It never goes. It's like, I call it a core, you know. But what you've got to do is you've got to coax people into tapping back into that, having a belief that it's still there. It never went in the first place. So we need to all get together as a collective and then talk about this. Thank goodness, over the last few years, that we're starting to recognise the importance of mental health. It's been sort of, it's been talked about a lot, but not actually anything done about it. Yeah. And there are now, you know, significant people that are promoting the fact that it's not something that's an aside. It's something that should be right at the front and foremost of the way that we do work. And then we need to have all the, you know, the backups like myself, counsellors, therapists, that are there for people when they need that extra help and support. Where rather than pushing people to achieve things, when you can see that there's support that they need, other than the last thing that they want is more and more stress being placed upon them.
And we shouldn't be embarrassed by it either. Shouldn't be embarrassed by talking about it.
That's a good point. Very good point. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with talking about. The thing about mental health is it's recognising that there's something that's not quite right, and then doing something about it at an early stage. The earlier you can deal with it, the easier generally it will be to be able to. I'm hesitating because sometimes there isn't an actual solution, but probably the word is manage.
Yeah.
Where if you leave it, you're getting deeper and deeper and deeper and more entrenched, and then when you do seek help, it's going to take a lot more involvement, a lot more time to be able to work through things. So it's like anything. It's you know, to take a phrase, it's sort of nipping it in the bud. Really.
Yeah. Totally agree. All right, Karl. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been really appreciated, and it'd be great to catch up with you again soon. And like I said, I'll set that up, and we'll have more of a group format with different perspectives.
Okay.
Which would be really interesting to see. So, well, thank you very much.
All right then. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.